Everyone. It's warmer in here, so we got, you had the cold out there to feel invigorated, and now we get to warm up with some conversation together. So we're really excited that you're here. It's a great day for a summit, sunny. The rain has broken. It's also the start of the special session, so it's a really great day here. I'll never forget California weather. So my brother did his PhD in Berkeley, and when he first came to visit, he showed up, and people said, "Oh, I'm really sorry about the weather." He's like, "Blue sky? What are you talking about? It's super cloudy today." So I don't see any clouds. Oh, there's a cloud over there. So that's California weather. But we're really grateful to have the rain because it's obviously we're in a climate emergency and a drought situation. So it's really great that we have the rain here. So welcome to the inaugural EOPA California Summit, Climate Emergency and Energy Security Summit. We're thrilled that you have joined us from all across the state. My name is Dominic Frangiola. I'm the co-founder and executive director of EOPA, Elected Officials to Protect America. We would like to thank our team that's here, and especially the California Energy Commission, CEC, the executive director, Drew Bonan, Retta, Naomi, and Noemi, and the whole CEC team. Thank our sponsors, Energy Foundation for the Summit and Resources Legacy Fund, as well as our partners, Climate Mayors, ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, Mayors Innovation Project, and the Young Elected Officials Network. So, and we'd also like to acknowledge and thank the indigenous peoples on whose land this is, and for their wisdom. And for a land acknowledgement, I'd love to invite up Chairwoman Agnes Gonzalez from the Pitt River Tribe for a land acknowledgement. Chairwoman.
Chemisumwe. Good morning, greetings. My name is Agnes Gonzalez. I'm the chair lady for the Pitt River Tribe. First and foremost, I would like to recognize the original stewards of the land, the Nisenan and the Miwok, also recognizing the Southern Maidu people to the north, Miwok to the south of the American River, and the Putwin to the west of the Sacramento River. Please acknowledge that we are standing on indigenous lands. As a matter of fact, wherever you go in California, you will be standing on ancestral lands of indigenous peoples. The Miwok, like many other tribes, are here to do this very day because they were able to survive the threats of expansion, exploitation, and an attempt to systematically destroy them. They, like us and many others, had persevered through the many attempts to destroy indigenous communities based upon the doctrine of discovery and its post-impact dominion. Dominion is a result of cause and effect to groups of people who are forced into a position to adapt or perish and to accept things as how they are. Indigenous people, if you did not know, are resilient, we are adaptive, we are responsive, and we are reactive. You see, being from Pitt River, like any other tribal nation, we are from the home of the struggle. We are from a tough place, often tested from trial by fire, and we are still here. We are now starting to understand the impacts of drought and climate change to our homelands. We are now facing threats, special and unique places that are identified through origin narratives, often expressed as sacred sites, that are drying out and are no longer functioning. We observe excess dryness and neglect to the land, causing mass fuel loads and fire hazards, a literal time bomb waiting to happen. Our homelands are being threatened by the potential of megafires and impacting habitat and ecosystems that would impact human forest and wildlife health. These areas will have ultimate impact to the past, present, and future of not only the indigenous communities, but other stakeholders and communities as well. We should not have a knee-jerk reaction and response to these obvious changes. With tribes, our response is based upon symbiotic relationships with the ecosystem and environment, which are backed by due diligence, scientifically sound, and minimal impact to cultural and natural resources. Often projects that are within tribal ancestral lands ignore the tribe's recommendations and importance placed on certain areas. So rather work together, there will be an attempt to smother the tribe's voices and fast-track projects that may ultimately cause immediate and long-term harm to tribal-based customs, narratives, and sacred sites. There needs to be an understanding to the needs of the tribes, economic, social, cultural, governmental, and historical, that ought to be recognized and implemented. So why does this matter, and why do we care? Being from a tribal community, there are roles and responsibilities that are inherent to the tribes. We live in tandem with our ancestral areas, and at one time, livelihoods depended on the availability of natural resources to provide the basics for sustenance and survival. We have origin narratives which bind us to roles of stewardship and advocacy for our lands and our people. We know that land is forever. The natural resources have and always will provide for our people, which is why we uphold our responsibility to advocate for the land and people. The land also houses living altars, sacred sites, ancient village sites, sites of creation, and burial sites of our ancestors. These original instructions supersede the Magna Carta, the U.S. Constitution, and doctrine of discovery, which is why we advocate for the stewardship of our territories and for the return of our illegally seized ancestral land. I can say this, is there was a time when Pitt River would fight eye for an eye for the return of land because it was historically and morally right to do so. Now we are working on policy, engaging in comprehensive consultation, seeking land divestitures and donations, or purchasing property in our homelands to be managed by the original caretakers of the land. But there was a time when it became necessary to occupy and seize ancestral lands as a way of repatriating our homelands for our people, and you ought to be fortunate that we are not occupying these lands. We wish to restore our lands to help provide medicines, food, and edibles, and resources for the arts, to provide a robust habitat for wildlife and species, and to do our part to address and prepare to adapt to climate change and climate-based impacts. Thank you for your time. And I'd also like to ask I'd like to thank Creator for bringing us all here safely today, and that we're all receptive with the information that's provided to us, and that we can be able to share, our stories and information, the points that need to get across. I pray that we all make it home to our final destination safely. Oh.
Thank you, Chairwoman. And I think you really brought here why we are here. As elected officials, as public servants, we're called to be stewards of our communities, of our state, and not just of our peoples now, but of future generations to come. And when there are issues like the climate crisis that come before us, it's up to us as public servants to step up in responsibility to solve that crisis. And and by joining together across jurisdictions, across boundaries, by linking together, we're much more powerful, and we can actually help change the course of history. So that's why we are here today. And that's really the reason why Elected Officials to Protect America was founded, because there are these crises. I was a council member in Caroline, New York, and we found ourselves in the ground zero for the fracking fight. And 55% of our land was leased for drilling. Our community was able to rise up, flip the council, put a ban in locally. The same story was playing out across the state of New York, with 200 municipalities passing bans or moratoria. We then organized elected officials across the whole state, over 1,000 elected officials, calling on the governor to protect our homes, our communities, and public health. And in partnership with grassroots communities, the grassroots movements, we won. And we won we're the first state to ban fracking on public health grounds. And we continued on issue after issue. Here in California, have been working for 4 years on phasing out oil and gas production and expanding clean energy, the transition to clean energy. So we're so excited that you're here to gather elected officials around the state that are the champions. So we have city officials here, county officials, tribal members, state representatives, state agency representatives. We have some state lawmakers who are at the Capitol, the press conference going on right now, and policy experts. So the goals for our summit to build relationships with one another, and here's some exciting opportunities that we can take, actions that we can take back home to transition to 100% clean energy, to create jobs, solve the climate crisis, protect our public health. So the two themes will be accelerating offshore wind responsibly. So what are the solutions that we can, as a state, workforce, manufacturing, environmental reviews, how can we help transition in that direction, and then a just transition from fossil fuels as well, centered on the immediate opportunity today, which is the governor's call for a price gouging penalty on oil companies. So it's been very inspiring to see the governor's leadership. So in the morning, we are honored to hear from the CEC Executive Director, Drew Bohan, who's leading the state to 100% clean energy, then followed by Dr. Habib Dagher, the inventor of the first floating offshore wind turbine in the country. So we're really excited. He's calling in from the state of Maine, the University of Maine. Then we'll hear from formerly Assemblyperson Chiu, current San Francisco city attorney, who authored the California's offshore wind law, AB 525. And then we'll hear from Jamie Court, who from Consumer Watchdog, to talk about today's news with the start of special session, this profits cap on oil companies. So we were expecting Governor Newsom to be here. His schedule has shifted. His office wishes us a wonderful day and summit. So we're very excited for the speakers that we have lined up today. So then we'll break at roughly noon for lunch, and we'll have opportunity to do videoing. So in the room across the hall, we'll have opportunity for you to share your personal story in a produced video on why transitioning to 100% clean energy and protecting our climate and communities is important to you. And then after that, we will continue into afternoon panels, accelerating offshore wind responsibly in California, climate emergency and energy security, have a networking break, and then a just transition to a clean energy economy. Then we'll have our first in-person, because of the pandemic, in-person leadership council with elected officials to protect California, protect America and California, and then from 6 to 8 we'll be at dinner. So while you're here, build relationships, get to know each other, and as a close here, the power of bringing people together at our DC summit. Martha Guerrero, the mayor of West Sacramento, was there and said, wow, this is awesome. We need to have our own summit in California. So we're so excited and would love to welcome up the mayor for a few words. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dominic, for that kind introduction, and to the leadership of elected officials to protect America. Welcome, everyone, to the California's Climate Emergency and Energy Summit, Security Summit. It is my honor to be here with you all this morning to offer a few opening remarks in partnership with the EOPA today. At the summit in Washington, D.C., where I first learned of EOPA's mission, I was moved by the passion of the participants who made clear the urgency of ramping up clean energy production to increase our global security, spur economic development, and employment opportunities, and protect our communities made vulnerable on the heels of ongoing Russian-Ukrainian conflict. I applaud Councilmember Katie Valenzuela, who responded to the call to host a summit in Sacramento in order to underscore the urgency and call on California's local and state officials to come together to meet the challenges we face collaboratively. I thank Governor Newsom for stepping forward in calling for a special session to establish penalties on oil companies, inflicting undue financial hardships on Californians, and for pushing forward new efforts to increase transparency and accountability. We look forward to working with the administration and seeing that the legislature accomplishes the administration's goal in this effort. The cities of West Sacramento and Sacramento are on track to implement the Mayoral Joint Commission on Climate Change, which came forth from the efforts of a diverse stakeholder group to address the goal of zero carbon emission in the Sacramento and West Sacramento region by 2045. The Commission's recommendations has been put in motion through several key initiatives in West Sacramento. The first initiative is the city's Mobility Action Plan, which received an award for excellence in transportation planning from the Sacramento Valley section of the American Planning Association for offering the community greener, affordable commuting alternatives. Another key initiative is our plug-in partnership with the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, which will see the installation of over 45 electrical vehicle charging stations citywide. This action will make EV ownership a much more viable option for West Sacramento commuters, with the priority locations identified in the city's Mobility Action Plan. These are just a few initiatives West Sacramento has put in action since 2020, and we are proud of the ongoing partnership with Sacramento and the many stakeholders who have brought these initiatives to fruition. And I also want to thank our Commissioner, Andrew Truman Kim, who has been working with us in partnership with the City of West Sacramento. Offshore wind is another clean energy source that California recognizes as a pathway to address the effects of an escalating climate emergency on public health and to begin the process of combating the systemic environmental racism. I am proud to stand alongside the California leadership of elected officials to protect America, who are getting behind plans for responsible development of offshore wind to address those issues and move the state towards a 100% clean and renewable energy economy. Not only could collecting energy through offshore wind position California to better meet its clean energy goals, the state also stands to see the creation of thousands of high-skilled industry jobs, including the protection of marine wildlife and coastal areas. While the escalating war in Ukraine, funded by Russian oil and gas profits, the urgency for countries to transition to clean energy has been brought into sharp focus, along with the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. There are creative options being considered at the state and federal level to establish thousands of shovel-ready union jobs, as well as port revitalization, which alone could immediately see the creation of up to 6,000 full-time per port, according to a report from Brightline Defense. I want to thank EOPA and all the panelists today here sharing their work and offering us more insight and guidance as we work together towards meeting our shared goals of safety and sustainability. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Martha. So I'd like to bring up our first keynote speaker, who's hosting us today, the Executive Director of the California Energy Commission. And as you know, the California Energy Commission is leading the state to a clean energy future. You've served the Californians for more than 15 years with leadership roles including the Energy Commission, California Environmental Protection Agency, the Ocean Protection Council, and the California Department of Conservation. So with no further ado, I would like to welcome up our Executive Director, Drew Bohan.
Thank you, Dominic, and thank you all for inviting me this morning. Unlike the mayor, I'm not a great public speaker, so I use PowerPoint slides to guide me. If you wouldn't mind, Duncan, just getting the presentation up. I have it here as a backup, just in case.
I have the backup?
Pardon me?
Can I have the backup, please?
What's the backup? Yeah, it's just right here. Well, why don't I just proceed, and if the slides come up, they come up, and that's great. If they don't,
They will come up.
all right, we'll work with it. Thank you. I have them here as my guide. So I know all of you have tribal concerns, state concerns, regional concerns, local concerns, and I'm just thrilled to be a part of a group here where you're able to carve out some time in your day to work on the defining issue of our time, as I see it. And personally, being a public servant is a great honor, and to have an opportunity to wake up every day thinking I might be able to be helping my kids, one of whom's a freshman in high school, the other one's in 8th grade. And you need a slide in there?
Yeah, sorry.
I'll just keep going. And really focus on this issue. So I want to share with you a little bit of California's experience and how we're approaching this. I know many of you are from California. A lot of this will be things you know, so I'll move through it very quickly, but I want to make sure I cover it. So if you could go to the next slide, thank you. Okay, so quick overview of the framing for California. So in 2006, we adopted a bill, AB 32, and that set a target of reducing our climate emissions to 1990 levels by 2020. At the time, people thought it was crazy. There was plenty of articles written about there's California again coming off with these ideas that are clearly unachievable. We achieved it in 2018, so we were ahead of schedule. Now we're looking at what the goals of SB 32 are, which chiefly is that by 2030 we want to be 40% below 1990 levels. Again, so we heard the same things in a few years ago when this bill was adopted. How can we possibly do that? It's just not possible, and we're well on our way. And I think we're going to achieve that. So that's the basic framework. And if you look at this slide here, the Air Resources Board in that original bill, AB 32, was tasked with developing a scoping plan. And this is just a framework for how we to try to guide all of our activities in with regard to climate. And they were given the charge to come up with some process of collecting funds to incentivize the move away from carbon. And it's been very successful. It's a cap and trade program, and it's been in place now for quite a number of years. From that plan, we have actions that we take, and the main agencies that do so are the Air Resources Board, the Energy Commission, where we are today, and the Public Utilities Commission. Although this is an across-the-board activity, many of the resource agency entities are also playing a role. But there's a number of actions from the ones listed here. We adopted not long ago a requirement that basically all new buildings have to have solar on them, and we impose efficiency standards on buildings and on appliances. There's a whole suite of programs. And then finally, we invest money, and we've invested a lot. I've got a slide that will get into that a little bit. Next slide, please. A little bit of background on the where we are in California. What are some of the trends in greenhouse gases? So this shows, the chart on the left shows from 2000 to 2020, our GDP went up, our population went up, and meanwhile our GHG emissions went down, both as an absolute factor, as a matter of per capita, and as a matter of per GDP. So we're doing pretty well, and as the fifth largest economy, we've been doing well financially. So it's pretty good evidence that taking these issues on is not something that is going to wreck your economy. Far from it. In our case, it's been quite a boost. We're among the clean energy leaders in the world, and I think it's been great for our economy. Over to the right is just a snapshot that probably many of you have seen that breaks down California and where our emissions are coming from. This looks close to the rest of the world, but we're a little different. In fact, if you look at transportation, it's the biggest wedge. And indeed, if you take industrial, the second biggest wedge, approximately a little less than half of that is refining. So if you add that to the transportation, we're at about half. Half of all GHGs in California come from transportation. If we fix this problem, not only will we help with climate, but we will reduce massive amounts of air pollution that make our people sick, cost a lot of needless investments in healthcare, and so we think it's a win-win, kind of regardless of how we approach it. Next slide, please. This is just a look at where we're getting electricity from, because the biggest source of GHGs is energy. It's the vast majority of our GHGs come from energy production, consumption, and this looks at where we get our energy from, or electricity from in California. The largest wedge is the maroon wedge, and you see it peaking at about 2013, 2014, and it's been declining ever since. The wedges at the top, the yellow is solar. That one's been growing the most. We expect that to grow quite a bit more going forward. And wind has been fairly stable. It's been terrestrial wind, and I know you are very interested today in learning more about offshore wind. I'll speak a little bit about that in a moment, but this is the picture of just resources in general. Next slide, please. This shows the famous duck curve some of you may have seen before, and what this is load in California, how much electricity is being demanded, minus the solar production. So it's shaped like a duck. That's why it's called the duck curve. And you see the duck belly getting increasingly large as we go into the years. And that's as a consequence of the increasing solar production we have, which is wonderful news, except we're at a point now where we're producing so much solar that occasionally we have to shed load, and the solar that's being produced isn't even able to be utilized effectively in California. Then you see this increased ramp over to the right of the slide. So when the sun goes down, and I think patterns are changing with COVID and people staying at home, but nevertheless, many people go home, turn on the lights, turn on the air conditioner in the summer, turn up the heat in the winter, and there's a huge spike in load that takes place right when the sun's going down. So this is a very central challenge to California, and it will be the same in many places. How do we deal with this need to ramp very, very quickly? I'll get to that a little bit later as well. Next slide, please. So how are we doing in terms of our goals? We have a goal through SB 100, which was a bill that was signed into law in 2018, calling for 100% clean electricity by 2045. And if you look at 2020, it's the most recent shot we have right there. If you count nuclear, if you count large hydro, neither of which meet the renewables definition, we're at nearly 60%. So we're doing pretty well given where we are. I'll also talk about nuclear. That's going to be changing at some point here, but right now this is what we've got. Next slide, if you could. So as we transition from a system of big power plants that send load in one direction, or send resources in one direction, and then they get consumed all around, we're looking at the need to make lots of changes in California. And our foundational features we want to be conscious of are expressed in these four words. Clean, we want our resources to be clean, we want them to be reliable, affordable, and equitable. So I want to take through each of these variables as I go through a couple slides here. Next slide, please. I promise I will not go through this at any length, but this shows where we are getting our resources from clean resources in 2019, what we're thinking we might be in 2030, and one portfolio mix that we might experience in 2045. Nobody can look into a crystal ball and say with any certainty, but this gives you an order of magnitude sense. We peaked this year at a load of 52 gigawatts. So to give you some sense, we're looking at the need for utility scale solar of 17 gigawatts larger than that by 2045. So this is a massive build we're going to need to do. And if you add up all these numbers, which this doesn't do, but if you add up the 2045 column numbers, you're at about 175 gigawatts. We're at 50 today. We've got to get to about 175 by 2045. This is both due to natural growth that we're expecting, plus the shift in buildings from the burning of fossil gas to using electricity. And of course, our vehicles are changing very, very rapidly. So this is just an overview of what we expect, or one scenario. Next slide, please. Now to get there is going to be a massive undertaking. We're expecting we're going to need to increase our solar and wind generation by about 3x over what we've been doing historically, and batteries have to go to 8x. So these are very large jumps. We're talking in the neighborhood of 4, 5, 6 gigawatts a year, each year over year for the next 20 years, and it's just a lot. So we're going to be working with communities throughout California as we look at trying to site these new developments that are going to produce the electricity that we're going to need to rely on. Good news on the batteries is, say 4 years ago, we basically had zero. We were at 0 megawatts being contributed to the system. Today we're over 4 gigs. 4 gigawatts, approaching 10% of our overall load is in batteries. It's dominated, if not exclusively, it's almost exclusively lithium today, and we're expecting that to change as we invest in new technologies and hope to not have to rely so much on one product that's in increasing demand. Next slide, please. This just looks at reliability as one of our core issues. I won't go into this in depth, but if you look at the blue bar, that shows our basic planning standards. One of the things the Energy Commission does is establish a planning standard and a target for what we're going to need to build and have available. So that's something we've done for a long time. We've added in a little piece at the top to cover some of the changing conditions that are out there. Because of supply issues, the next wedge above the light blue is new project delays that we're experiencing. And then extreme heat. Extreme heat is no longer a once in a 10-year event or once in a 20-year event. It's an every year event. So we're having to factor that much more carefully into our planning. And then finally, drought and fire events, because when we have droughts, we get less hydro. Obviously, less water is pushing less less energy through the turbines that we can collect, and fire just causes all manner of damage of systems and our wires, so we're needing to factor that in as well. Next slide, please. This is a look at September 6th. September 6th for some of us was a very memorable day because it was one of the hottest days of the year. And this shows, this is from the California Independent System Operator, this shows the real-time load on the system. So you see it creeping up there from the early morning to the middle of the slide where it starts to get red. This is where we peaked at 52,000. This was the 52,000 megawatts or 52 gigawatts. This was the highest we've ever hit in California. And my colleagues and I were frantically racing around trying to identify load that could be reduced from players who are operating large loads and can turn them down for a short period of time, and trying to fire up every other resource we had in California to make sure we kept the lights on. We succeeded. We made it. And an interesting dip, if you see the red circle, we employed a lot of tools. The first dip you see in the red there before the red circle was when we called flex alerts, where we invite people in California to turn down their load a little bit. They responded. Then we tried something that was unprecedented and used, I think it was the Amber Alert system that goes to every cell phone in California. We sent a notice saying, hey, folks, we're really in a threatening situation here. Could you please adjust your load? And you see this just incredibly precipitous drop. We dropped about 2 gigawatts in 15 minutes, and there's collective cheering amongst my colleagues and I as we're watching this and worrying that we know we're just a belt spinning off shy of having a problem, and we made it through. But this is the kind of thing we're trying to track really closely and make sure we've got the resources to meet demand. Next slide, please. So what are some of the critical elements? Here's where we look at the future. We know that our future is going to be dominated by solar. We need to build lots of it. We need to build it, in the no regrets places like rooftops and parking lots and land that we've already given up to our uses. But we're going to need to put it in open areas as well in California and throughout the world. We're looking offshore. So the Energy Commission was charged with identifying planning targets for offshore wind in California. So we spent months and months doing public outreach, talking to the folks that live up in the two areas that we're looking at, up in the north in Humboldt County and off of Morro Bay. And we set a target. My bosses adopted a target a couple months ago of 3 to 5 gigawatts by 2030 and 25 gigawatts, which is, again, about half of our current load, by 2045. These targets are ambitious. Offshore wind in such depths is not unprecedented, but it presents different challenges. So we've got a lot to learn and little time to do it in. The other thing that's key is long duration storage. This is absolutely key to our future. We got a tremendous solar resource, but as that duck curve showed, it mostly comes up in the middle of the day and tapers off on the shoulders as the sun's either coming up or going down. So what do? Well, we got to capture a lot of that and then use it in the evenings when there is no sun. Thankfully, offshore wind is a very compatible resource with solar because it tends to blow most strongly when the sun is down. So that's a nice complement. But there's still going to be times when the wind's not blowing and the sun is not. So we're going to need backup storage. So this is one of those large checks that we granted to a tribe called the Viejas tribe in Southern California. $31 million to install a major battery system using, I think it was a zinc-based chemistry and a vanadium-based chemistry. So we're trying two different chemistries out, but this will be real world in operation, providing backup power to run their facilities on this tribal land. Very excited about that. And there's many things, but the final one I want to point to is distributed energy resources. We're increasingly relying on more homegrown solutions and microgrids and things that allow people in communities, which after all is what we care about, is people using their electricity, and trying to make reliability better by decentralizing some of the electricity production. Next slide, please. Okay. Electric vehicles. There was a lot made of electric vehicles when we had this September 6th event where we nearly lost power, and we heard people on the news saying, well, what's wrong with California? Here they are barely able to get by with the resources they've got, and they want to electrify vehicles and they want to electrify buildings. What are they thinking? And the answer is pretty simple. And that is that far from being a drag on our system, electric vehicles in particular, and buildings as well, provide us tremendous flexibility. So this talks a little bit about that. I'll just give you a figure. The last quarter we measured, I think ending in September, new sales in California, nearly 1 in 5 vehicles was a zero-emission vehicle. Nearly 1 in 5. In 2008, it was 0. I mean, we have come a long way in a short period of time. And those numbers, if you track them, have been going up consistently. And with more models on the road and people seeing their wives and sisters and neighbors and brothers driving an electric car, it's starting to feel a little bit more normal. But this is exciting. I'll give you a figure that I think is interesting. If we've sold about 1.3 million ZEVs in California, which is just under half of all U.S. sales. But if you take 1 million BEVs, so a subset of ZEVs, but BEVs, battery electric vehicles, if we had 1 million of them, and every one of them was able to contribute its electricity during September 6th when the lights were about to go out, when you saw that chart where we were peaking, that would send back to the grid 10 gigawatts. 1 million vehicles sends 10 gigawatts back to the grid. Will we ever get 100% participation? Of course not. But just to give you a sense of the order of magnitude, so if we get to 5 million vehicles, which we're expecting in this decade, that's enough to run our whole system. And it can run it for as long as the battery has capacity to do so. But we really only need it for that period when the sun goes down and we have a steep ramp of the need for resources. So we think electric vehicles hold the keys to a lot of this. Not only will it be great for the grid, it is going to reduce costs for car owners. Already it's cheaper to fuel your electric vehicle in every service territory or every territory in California than it is to drive an ICE vehicle. And it's just going to get better still as we move into the future. And if we can reward you for giving electricity back to the grid at a certain period of time when we need it we need it badly, and we're willing to pay for it. So electric vehicle owners will hopefully soon have easy tools where they can set it and forget it and say, yeah, if I'm plugged in and it's 7 o'clock at night, go ahead, take the power back the other direction and pay me. And then when you don't need it anymore, you can start charging me again for the electricity I draw. But just tremendous possibilities there. We've also made some big investments, and this should help with affordability and one of our other components. I'm not going to go through all these, of course, but this is a big investment for California to be making. And this doesn't include the IIJA, the federal legislation, or the IRA, the more recent one, that have a substantial amount of money coming to California as well. We're looking at the Energy Commission. We are expecting to get about $10.5 billion through state investments and federal investments. But this is going to, we think, fuel job creation and provide lots and lots of side benefits, but its ultimate focus is to address the climate emergency. Next slide, please. Oh, apologies, that was the slide I meant to be showing. No, next one is good. This is the one with all the investments. I'm looking at it on my screen, but I didn't notice that it wasn't up there. So these are just the suite of investments that California is making in this area. Next slide, please. This is a subset of one of those, and I'll just go through it very quickly. We've got strategic reliability assets, what we call DBA, distributed energy electricity backup assets, and demand-side grid support. Because of time, I'm just going to move quickly and say these are 3 programs that we're helping to manage that are looking at this bridge we need for the next few years as the renewable resources are ramping up and we're getting deeper penetration with batteries. We still have a need for fossil resources. And so some of these investments are indeed going to be into fossil resources. It's not what we endeavor to do, but we view it as a transition that we're managing as best we can. Next slide, please. I just have a couple more slides, and I'll be thrilled to take questions and engage in a dialogue. So a bill that was passed this session is SB 846. It does a few things. First one isn't on this sheet, so I'll just describe that first. The Energy Commission is tasked with looking at Diablo Canyon. It's our last remaining nuclear power plant, and it's about 2.2 gigawatts. That's big. It produces a lot of electricity. And it was planning to be shut down in 24 and 25. And this legislation said, hey, let's take a look and see if it makes sense to keep this resource longer. So my bosses are charged with voting by March on the answer to this question. Is it prudent to keep Diablo for the next 5 years beyond its normal retirement date? Not is it cost effective, but is it prudent? So it's an interesting question. We're looking at it very carefully right now, and we'll come out with that in March. The other two things this bill did are, one, invested $1 billion, and I listed some of the resources we're supposed to be looking into with that $1 billion, but these, again, are long-term investments. Some are short-term, some are long-term in this transition that we need to go through. We know it's going to be costly, but we think it's ultimately going to be a winner. And then finally, demand response has been something that other states have had better success with than California has. About 3% of our peak load is being met by demand response, where you're able to shift your resources like the vehicles discharging to the system versus drawing from it, or turning the thermostat down a little bit when it's warm and turning it up a little bit when it's hot out. So we save electricity there. So our charge in this bill is to develop a goal, a statewide goal for how much should we be aiming to achieve. We peaked at just shy of 6%. We're now at 3%, so we know we can do a lot with demand response. We're looking at that carefully. Next slide, please. And then finally, but certainly not last, in order, is equity. This takes a look at where power plants are located in California. And if you look at the y-axis, the vertical axis, it's just the number of power plants in California. And over to the right is a diagram that shows what types of plants we're talking about. So peaker plants, cogen, et cetera. And the x-axis is our CalEnviro percentile. CalEnviro is a tool to look at socioeconomic issues, pollution issues, environmental issues in communities, and rank communities by percentile, by how challenged they are by these various factors. And what leaps out is that the majority of these plants are located in these communities, the communities least able to deal with the problems that these fossil generating plants produce. So that's really critical as we look to this transition. Next slide, please. And then we want to make sure that as we have this conversation and we try to figure out what to do, we're going to have to make difficult choices. And I think what I pull out of this, I'm not going to read through this, but I think trust matters. We heard from the chairwoman of the Pitt River Tribe that the tribes have not been treated fairly throughout American history, and we want to right that. And we want to, I'll give an example. In what we're referring to as Lithium Valley, which is the Salton Sea area, there's a tremendous amount of lithium deposits. So it's appealing because if we could extract that lithium, it will help to make batteries, and California could be the center of it, lots of good things. But there's people who live there, and there's people who have lived there for generations. And so we have to be very thoughtful and mindful and respectful and get everybody's opinion about, okay, how do we go about this? Should we go about it? What are the trade-offs? What would be a way to make something that somebody might not find appealing more appealing? So we've been spending quite some time on that issue, and it's true no matter where you go. If you look to the North State and you look at putting offshore wind, there are fishers who are up there who think that this may impact the way they make their living. We have tribes for whom these lands and these vistas and the ocean is sacred. So wherever we go, we're going to have to work with folks. And I conclude with conflict is necessary. There's going to be conflict. We're not going to be able to achieve all of our goals without some disruption. So what we want to be able to do is make sure we talk to everybody who has a stake and wants to have a role, and try to figure out a solution that is the best for everybody. And then finally, I would just point to this great implementation where we're going to build multiple gigawatts per year, every year for a long time. It's going to take some time. So starting with what we agree on. Again, most people don't object to the idea of putting solar panels on rooftops. So if we have massive, box malls and warehouses and that sort of thing, if the roof can stand it, it seems like a good opportunity to put solar panels. Parking lots, same thing. So let's start with those things, and then we will definitely get to tougher ones, but let's start with what we agree on. And then constantly getting input to make sure from the public that we're going in the direction that we can get a critical mass of people to agree on. And then finally, acknowledge that it's going to be tough. We're going to have to make trade-offs. That we are everything we do, if we want to live in a modern society, is going to have an impact. Everything. Solar is pretty low touch. It's about as low impact as it gets, but it's not impact-free. So we want to be looking at all that. And then finally, I just want to thank you again. And shall I take a few minutes for questions, or did I go over time? Okay. So if anyone has any comments, questions, please.
at the same time, I have sitting here so far this morning, I listened to all your ideas. They're great. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm behind you. Can't say for the rest of the council. But we're behind you a little bit. But there's one thing that I have that you have not brought up yet, is that if you're taking fossil fuels from Mother Earth, and you know what's happened to us, you can take lithium from Mother Earth, how much more are you going to take from Mother Earth? Are you still going to destroy something? You got to remember that. You destroy something. But at the same time, you're making all these batteries, and even just a regular car battery lasts only 2 years, and you're already having problems with those, and you're going to add more batteries and bigger batteries to this? Where is your guys' plans to take care of these batteries and stuff that don't pollute the air or go back into Mother Earth and destroy Mother Earth's areas like the nuclear power? I have not heard nothing in the last 2 years or anything about that, but I know for right now you have a battery storage stockpile in California right now, just for cars alone, and now you can add bigger batteries. What's your guys' plans for those? I mean, we're behind you, but you're also not looking at the future. So far, you have not really looked at the future of what's going to happen, because we just took away 4 dams on the Klamath River. It took us 25 years to fight for. And now you're going to take wind power and put it out in front of our river that we're protecting fish from. And you guys haven't come up to us and talked to us about how it's going to affect the fish that are going to migrate back down the Klamath River and all this stuff and how it's going to hit. It took us 25 years to fight for that. Is it going to take us another 25 years to fight for these polar planners to make sure they're safe for our fish? Those are 2 things that I haven't heard in the last 2 years. Listening to you guys talk about all this. We just want to know, what's your future outlook for this? You already made one cause by taking away stuff, and to me it sounds like it's good plans, don't get us wrong, it's great plans, we want that. But are you looking out for the future and the waste that's going to come behind it? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take your last point first, and the short answer is yes. We are going to be reaching out. We've done some outreach up in the North State. We definitely want to hear from the Karuk. We want to hear from the Yurok. We want to hear from the Hoopa. We want to hear from all the folks that live up there. And we've started that, but we're going to do more of that. The federal government is going to be conducting a lease sale before long, and it's going to be years before we get anything moving. But absolutely, in terms of damage from extraction, I would note that there's broadly two types of ways to get lithium. One is hard rock. You knock out the hard rock and you add chemicals and you extract the lithium that way. Or, and this is the way it is in the Salton Sea area, you take brine from underneath the ground, you bring the brine up, and you're able to pull out the lithium that way and return the brine back underground. To your point, taking lithium out of Mother Earth no doubt has some impacts. And so we need to figure out what those are exactly and make sure that we mitigate for them as much as possible. On the back end, once we've gotten the lithium from wherever we get it and we've used it and it's reached the end of its useful life, a couple points. One thing we're looking at is second life batteries. So once a vehicle battery drops below, say, a vehicle lithium battery drops below, say, 80%, performance of the car starts to suffer, and you need to start thinking about it, a new suite of batteries. Well, what do you do with all these old batteries? Well, the first thing is they still have a lot of life left in them, and they can still be used for applications that don't require the sort of responsiveness that a vehicle does. So we can put them in stationary places like we're doing today with the 4 gigs we've already built of storage. So that's the first part, and then the second part is, well, what about when we're done there on the back end? And there, the state legislature commissioned a study that was completed, I think, earlier this year, it might have been late last year, that looks at just that question. So I can get you the information on that if you want, but I think it's a thoughtful assessment of how to look at end of life for batteries. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Shilani Cruz Gonzalez, and I'm a school board member in Azusa in LA County. I have 2 questions. One is around the solarizing of the parking lots, right? And you see a lot of that happening across school districts, which is great, but it's really individual districts doing that on their own. And so, for example, like in my district, we ended up not choosing to do that because when we investigated it, it wasn't going to be a cost savings for us to do that. We live in a local municipality with its own light and water, so the rebates weren't going to work out for us. But we have schools across districts, 1,000 districts across the state, right, who are each individually sort of figuring this out, deciding whether or not they're going to do it. and 2/3 of them are small districts with less than 2,500 students, so they're probably not even thinking about it, right? So that's one question: is how do you think policy-wise the state can help sort of ease that in? I think you might maybe like that the way we've done electric buses, right? And then my second question is around just the opportunities for grants, right? Because grants come up, but it's usually like first come, first serve, and especially for school districts that don't have a lot of local capacity just to do grants for education, right? It ends up being the very large districts that have a lot of capacity that end up like grabbing all the resources. And so those are the two things that I'm curious about what you're thinking from the state commission level.
So I was fortunate to be around in 2004, 5, 6, working for then Governor Schwarzenegger, and that was when some of the initial large investments were made in solar. And the idea was, if we make these investments today, they should help drive down the cost of solar, not only the panels and all the equipment, but what it takes to do it. You have contractors that aren't accustomed to doing this sort of thing or weren't back then. Now it's easy. Now it's pretty straightforward and people know how to do it. So the prices declined so much that there aren't much in the way of subsidies for solar because it's already about the most cost-effective resource that there is. That said, to your point of communities that lack the time or the energy to figure out exactly how to do it, the Public Utilities Commission and the Energy Commission both can provide some assistance to try to direct you, but there are also a number of private entities out there that can help to design and put the appropriate thing in place. I think I missed your second part of your question.
A lot of the grants are on a first-come, first-served basis, right? And so, for school districts, especially if they're school-related, right? It's the big urban districts that capture a lot of those dollars.
Right. Okay. Good point. So the $1 billion from AB 846 that I mentioned, and some of these other pots of funding, will very likely, we're designing them now, so we don't have a clear idea on exactly what will get funded, but one of the things we're looking at is microgrids in communities, which is basically a fancy name for usually solar generation, batteries to store, and a brain that helps to maximize the value of both. And so those are tricky. A local community isn't going to figure out how to do that on their own, very likely. But again, there are consultants that do this for a living and work with folks. So as these programs mature and we get clearer program design, we should stay in contact because, and we want to avoid the just first come, first serve challenge you're talking about, where those who have done this a bunch of times know how to do it better. But again, there's even consultants that will help with that to help you put together an application.
Wonderful. I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you so much. Igor Tregub in Berkeley, California. I have two questions, and thank you for your leadership, your involvement with the 1 million roofs initiative, and of course now we have 1.5 million solar roofs, which is exciting. Our community is very concerned about proposed CPUC rules that would slash the net export compensation by 75%, making rooftop solar more expensive, twice as expensive actually for working class and middle class folks that we need to invest. My first question is, what can the CEC do to impress on the governor and the CPUC that this proposal needs additional work? And our council actually passed an emergency resolution to that effect. My second question is, it was residential battery storage customers that were able to help us make sure we didn't get into a blackout situation, as you know, earlier this year. What can the CEC do to ensure that emergency reliability programs are centered on customer-sided batteries, leveraging the know-how of battery storage manufacturers and installers to be able to get this done and help the state in its grid system?
Thank you for that. To your first question on the PUC, this has been an ongoing debate, as you well know. Some years ago, the PUC came out with a proposal to revise NEM, and they ended up shelving that, and they came out with a more recent proposal, and it does indeed reduce the incentive, but reasonable minds can differ about whether the reductions are too steep. I know they're right in the middle now of a public process, and I think I'm best off letting that play out. But clearly your voice is being heard. I know they're hearing about it. There's a lot of press being generated. Lots of people show up for their hearings to take public comment, but we watch that process closely. And then I'd say to your other question, we first invested in microgrids, which is, again, sort of this nice local solution. I don't know how many years ago, maybe a decade ago, and we've since invested in 30 or 40 of these. So it's starting again to become normalized. At the beginning, it was spare parts from Home Depot and just cobbling things together. And now lots of companies have developed innovations to make this a whole lot easier. So as we move forward, it's going to be a whole lot easier for communities to figure out solutions that will work. And we think one of our funding programs is going to target very much community solutions, whether you're up in the hills where there are power safety shutoffs that take place and you lose power at times when the utility is concerned that their power lines might cause a fire. It'd be nice to have a backup where you can at least have a community center where if it's 110 degrees out and the air is terrible, you can go somewhere and plug in a device that might provide oxygen or whatever else. So that's going to be part of something we do for sure.
Great. Thank you so much, Executive Director. Oh, we have one burning question here.
Thank you. I'll try to make this quick. I'm Tom Butt. I'm the mayor of Richmond, but I'm also the chair of the board of MCE, California's oldest and first CCA. If you indulge me, mine is less of a question than a quick request, and that is that I would hope that the California Energy Commission, as well as the governor's office, the CPUC, and the legislature, would be a better partner with the CCA statewide. The CCA statewide have really led California's transition to clean energy, but they're being increasingly regulated in a way that is an impediment to them doing what they've done so well for so long. And some specific requests. One of them is for the California Energy Commission to take a harder look at clean hydrogen, both for storage and for EV fuel. That seems to be a low priority, and the focus is primarily on the battery storage. The second is the EV charging network. If we're going to get to where we need to go, California's EV charging network needs to be radically increased in the near future. Right now there's so much emphasis on providing chargers in your home or your apartment or your place of work. But if you want to drive your car, if you want to drive your EV, let's say up to Sierra City, you're out of luck. I mean, there's nothing there. So there has to be a radical increase in the EV charging network in California if we're going to get there. And then the last thing is, I think it goes back to the California Energy Commission and their relationship with CCAs. It needs to be a relationship where the Energy Commission sets high-level objectives and not so much prescriptive regulations. CEC is starting to get into things like rate setting, and the CCAs are governed by local elected officials, and they do rate setting for a lot of different reasons. But more and more, the CEC, the CPUC, and other state regulatory agencies are really getting really down into the weeds with these CCAs that are doing such a great job in California. So that's my point.
Well, Dominic, I'll respond briefly. I know you're trying to move on, but hear you on that. I think you might be referring to load management standards that we're in the process of adopting that would compel utilities and CCAs to take a look at hourly and sub-hourly rates that correspond to demand on the system, and to try to use that as a tool to, again, shift load around. So I hear you on that. On EV infrastructure, couldn't agree more. That's chiefly what we do. The Air Resources Board focuses on incentives for vehicles. We focus on the infrastructure to support the vehicles, and we want to get them out there as fast as possible. We're at about 80,000 public and shared, just over 80,000 public and shared chargers in California. We want to get to a couple 100,000 here as quickly as we can. And then finally on hydrogen, I would just say California has, I believe, the largest hydrogen network on the planet. That includes, as compared to countries like South Korea and Germany that have been quite bullish on hydrogen. We're up to almost 60. Our target is 200. We have the funds necessary to invest. They're a little slow in getting built, but we're there. I would note, though, that there's over 100 models of battery electric vehicles in California based on information from Veloz, and who tracks this sort of thing. And I believe there's 2 hydrogen model light-duty vehicles in California. So we're still hopeful that will grow, and we want to have multiple options out there. But so far, it's been a tough sledding on the light-duty side. So thank you all very much, Dominic. Thank you.